it comes on the backdrop of the EU itself deciding to take an approach of bilateral strategic partnerships with each of the Gulf countries. And there's no reason to say that the UAE, if these negotiations are successful, would be the only country in the GCC to go about it solo.
So there is an opportunity for a regional integration as well.
Absolutely. There's an opportunity for bilateral agreements with each Gulf country.
Okay.
That within itself would create some form of regional integration with regards to the EU. The reason this is happening now is because the negotiations between the GCC as a bloc and the EU has been stalled for several years. Suspended in 2008, talks about it have resurfaced in the last summit in 2024 and may come again in 2026 when the next EU-GCC summit is held in Riyadh. And I think for Saudi Arabia, I think it's clear that Saudi Arabia favors trade agreements with partners as a GCC bloc. However, as we argued in the paper, this could pave the way for Saudi Arabia's and GCC's ambitions to come to fruition. When the EU familiarizes itself with the UAE as a Gulf market, and perhaps the UAE succeeds in some of the negotiating stringent points, then this might open the door for a wider bloc agreement with the EU.
What makes this agreement different? So the UAE has signed over 24 agreements, trade agreements. What makes this one special, and what added value will it have?
As far as I'm aware, I believe the EU is the second largest trading partner for the UAE. And that means as a bloc, not any individual country. However, that means that essentially, as the UAE diversifies its CEPA portfolio, that the EU would retain its place and, if not, increase its place in terms of the portfolio of trade that the UAE has. And the reason that this is particularly important is I believe this is the largest single bloc that the UAE is pursuing a CEPA agreement with. There are other blocs that it has pursued a CEPA with, and succeeded in some. However, the EU is the largest one, and it's a significant market for the UAE.
Okay,
I think the EU probably has learned its lesson from one of the reasons that the negotiations with the GCC did not succeed is, according to some scholars and diplomats, that the EU was too stringent on these labor and other standards. And while they did bring it up again in the negotiations held according to the transcript and the negotiating files that were released between the UAE and EU, the negotiations that were held in June, July, they did push for these standards as well. These were only this was only the first round.
What other elements included are in this deal?
I think it is a serious opportunity. Green hydrogen is a significant market that many Gulf countries have invested in, will continue to invest in. And the EU has a lot to learn from how we develop these technologies in our climate. As climate change evolves, the EU might face approximate climates in some of its regions. So learning from the Gulf countries is important, and how we deal with these technologies and invest in them. And then, of course, the UAE and the Gulf in general would benefit a lot from the know-how that the EU has so far developed in green hydrogen.
So you mentioned that the GCC EU summit is very different from the EU-UAE trade deal. Is AI integrated in this deal as well or not?
It's not clear at the moment. I would say...
because it was one of the major points in the GCC EU summit, right?
Yes. However, it seemed to me that in the GCC EU summit, which the UAE was also a part of, that was one of the many files that were discussed on top of the agreement that talks will restart between the EU and GCC. However, when it comes specifically to the trade agreement, it's not clear how important AI and emerging technologies will be. I wouldn't dismiss it. I would say it probably is quite important. The UAE is investing quite a lot in artificial intelligence, um, and I think there was recently talks of an UAE firm, government-backed firm, funding a French AI firm, something in the millions or reaching $1 billion. That was one of the many files that were discussed
Mhm.
on top of the agreement that um, talks will restart between the EU and GCC. However, when it comes specifically to the trade agreement, it's not clear how important AI and emerging technologies will be. I wouldn't dismiss it. I would say it probably is quite important. The UAE is investing quite a lot in artificial intelligence, um, and I think there was recently talks of an UAE firm, government-backed firm, funding a French AI firm, something in the millions or reaching $1 billion.
Thank you so much for this insightful conversation,
Thank you so much.
and thank you for coming.